Welcome everybody to this afternoon's session on what's happened to trust and trust economics and all that. With Özlem Onaran here and Michael Roberts online. I can't see Michael because I've got my behind me. Behind you. Behind you. So Michael's got slides. Because people have 12, 15 minutes or so to speak. What time are we finishing the session? In about an hour and a half's time, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay.
Michael was here.
He is here.
He's there.
So it's behind us. It's behind us. So Michael Roberts is a Marxist economist and author who worked in the City of London for over 40 years in various financial institutions, and is the author of The Great Recession, A Marxist View, The Long Depression, A World in Crisis, and his latest book, Capitalism in the 21st Century, is going to be out by Pluto very soon. Özlem is a professor of economics at Greenwich University, a member of the Labour Party and a supporter of anti-capitalist resistance, and she's written or co-authored a number of books, which some of them have been published by Resistance Books. Unfortunately, I haven't got them here, but they're available on our website. We did publish them at the time of the last Great Recession, 2008. So there are things in the book which are still relevant, right? But
I have written new stuff since then. People can find it on my website.
Excuse me, for some reason all of them appearing down.
So, and both of them got a website, so go on their websites. Okay, shall we take Özlem first? So you have to go first, Özlem?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll.
The projector is blinding me. If there's a solution to that, if it's not, that's fine.
Yeah, it's difficult, but I think it does.
That's fine. Okay. Yeah, wonderful to be back face to face. I think this is one of my very first political activities face to face. I have to say, when you first asked us to talk about trust economics, I thought, oh, this is ancient history. But I think it is true that it is important to talk about how a conservative government failed so badly. Put it in the context of multiple crises, and understand that COVID-19 had been a divergence from neoliberal dogmas, and this was temporary. That window of opportunity has closed quite substantially, and well, as trust economics is ancient history, we are now austerity too in Britain. But still, what was this conservative mini budget of September 2022? The budget is a budget of very regressive tax cuts for the rich, essentially, and it's bringing back a very simple Thatcherite fetish of low tax supply side economics and trickle down economics, meaning if you don't tax the rich, they invest, it creates more growth and more employment, it trickle downs to everyone. This was their take on the leveling up agenda of Boris Johnson's conservatism. This obviously meant that there would be more public borrowing by the government. And I wish to emphasize one thing. Here is the important lesson the left has to discuss based on this. It was quasi a right-wing version of the modern monetary theory. Modern monetary theory became a sort of celebrity Keynesian economics version. Well, they call themselves Keynesian. Not every Keynesian will agree that this is very Keynesian. Be that as it might, some of the key economists there, like Stephanie Kelton of modern monetary theory in the US, were advisors to Bernie Sanders. And I claim, well, actually, Liz Truss' car tank budget was a right-wing version of that modern monetary theory. And what we have to learn is that if you're not US, deficit spending for any government, even a conservative government, may be difficult. So if you are a left government, that deficit spending might really be impossible. Anyway, let's understand the market's reaction to that September budget. They said, oh, this is not going to stimulate the economy. That fetish of low tax, trickle down is not the answer. But there is then more things to come. The killer really was the incompetence to coordinate the actions of the government in terms of saying people now have to borrow more to spend because we are taxing less. And their lack of coordination with the central bank, the Bank of England, who is implementing monetary policy, who at that time is committed to the so-called quantitative tightening, which is Bank of England's conservatism, but says to curb inflation. Now we are committed to selling off all the government bonds we have been buying since the Great Recession of 2008. Basically, Bank of England was saying we will shrink our quantitative easing gilt government bond portfolio by about 80 billion pounds over the next year, including selling of bonds before they mature, before they come to the end of their term. And this is actually a more conservative, hawkish, anti-inflation monetary policy compared to other major central banks in the world. So what is happening? In September, both the government and the Bank of England are committed to sell huge quantities of government debt. That means that's also going along with the market saying if the government is having this tax cuts, more borrowing, it's inflationary, the Bank of England will have to increase the interest rates even more in the future. And the implication of that is more government bonds being sold, interest rate also is going to increase, the price of government bonds in the secondary market starts falling. And nobody saw it coming. I haven't read anything, neither by the mainstream or financial analysts or heterodox economists. Nobody saw the unexpected consequence of the increase in the interest rates and the fall in the government bond values for the UK pension funds who have defined benefit pension schemes. Apparently now we have learned and we have started to pay more attention to that. Those defined benefit pension schemes whose main remit is to invest in low-risk, long-term assets such as government bonds, because they have been finding themselves in a difficult situation when the interest rates are at 0% level, well, basically since the Great Recession of 2008. And with the allowance of the pension oversight body, they have been engaging in speculation in plain English language. In polite language, it's hedging activity. I don't understand how this is really hedging. It is quite speculative what they're doing, and pension funds are not allowed to speculate. They've been investing in the so-called liability-driven investment, LDI. So what are they doing? They're borrowing from banks to invest in high return assets, and as collateral to the bank, they're showing the government bonds they're already owning. So when the price of government bonds go down, obviously the banks say, hey, your collateral is now getting worthless. I want new collateral, the so-called margin call by the banks to the pension funds. So this activity sounded quite profitable or genius when interest rates were at zero, but obviously as the interest rates went up, yields surged, and thereby government bond prices fell, it became unsustainable. So pension funds had to sell now more government bonds to meet the bank's so-called margin calls to show more collateral. That means there's fire sales. That amplifies obviously market volatility, creates this dangerous feedback loop. And at the end of that whole experience, Bank of England had to do a U-turn. It did recommend actually buying gilts to prevent a financial meltdown in the pension sector. Okay, sorry. Right. Now, what do we learn out of that? Obviously, this is all happening in the context of further limitations or problems of the conventional monetary policy response. It's trying to tackle an inflation that isn't caused by demand. It isn't caused by wage price spiral, but it is acting as if it is caused by these things. It doesn't recognize that the inflation is caused by increasing imported input costs, as well as increasing profiteering by the firms at the top end of the firm distribution, large firms, who are increasing their profit margins. So there is a profit price spiral, not a demand and wage price spiral. There's an increase in the price of gas, oil, wheat, but the Bank of England is saying, to beat that inflation, we need to increase interest rates. It need be cause a recession and increase unemployment. Well, there are further problems with that thinking. The trick of such policy to curb inflation is to decrease the bargaining power of workers by increasing unemployment. But actually, since workers have lost their bargaining power with the falling trade union power, the deregulation in the labor market, as in many people work with 0 hours contracts or with dodgy self-employment practices, workers actually don't have much bargaining power. To really curb inflation, you need to cause now a deeper recession and even a deeper rising unemployment, which is also a very brutal thing to do and a difficult thing for any government to survive through. So what Bank of England is basically trying to do is an overkill. And this is coming on top of a situation where also actually prices or inflation is probably peaking. Now, the second big problem in all these policies response is that, well, actually there are conflicting targets that the Bank of England is juggling. So on the one end, there is the inflation target. It is trying to increase interest rates to deal with it, be that as it may. But it also is a financial stability target. And if you have very indebted households and firms at the bottom end of the term distribution, and you have the pension funds in the non-bank financial institutions, a lot of complexity and vulnerability to the increasing interest rates, the falling government bonds. This creates a big systemic risk for the banking sector as well, with potential spillovers when households, firms, and pension funds are having sustainability issues. On top of that comes, of course, then the fiscal policy response. That's the abandoning of the mini budget within 3 weeks. Trust is gone, ancient history. So now you have a government who says, to prevent inflation, we need to tame demand, but also we need to control public debt to GDP, national income ratio. This won't happen amidst a recession. They're shooting themselves in their own foot. Austerity version 2 will decrease national income. That's gonna lead to lower tax revenues, even if they try to do some tricks that would actually lead to higher tax rates effectively. Tax revenues are likely to fall. Debt sustainability will get worse, so debt to GDP ratio is expected to actually increase, in my opinion. So it's self-defeating. It rests on some myth that they call a fiscal black hole. But actually, in a recession, what you need to do is to increase spending against the business cycle or economic cycle. So in a way, they have driven the wrong lessons from Truss's mini budget. Asset fund managers have written a letter in the Financial Times saying that they said, we did not ask for austerity. We are asking for policy gradualism, not austerity. So what would be our alternatives? What is to be done in the short run? And yesterday I couldn't come because I did speak at an inflation conference that said, what is to be done? Well, in the short run, what you need to do is to reverse the squeeze in wages and low incomes. There's no ifs, no buts, no apologies. We need to strengthen the trade unions, increase both public sector pie and private sector pay, and the minimum wage, and benefits, matching not just the inflation today, but recovering the past losses, as well as trying to get some of the increase in labor's productivity. It won't be easy for the firms at the bottom of the distribution. There will be bankruptcies. Okay, well, then we need to really go back and think about fiscal support, short-time work arrangements, because some people may lose their jobs if firms are shutting down. The second short-term thing is, yes, we don't want inflation. We want to arrest inflation. The way to do that isn't what Bank of England is doing, isn't what government is doing. It is about price controls. You need to control energy prices, not by trying to subsidize gas and oil companies, but by guaranteeing basic energy needs for households, basically at a capped price, and obviously about that basic guaranteed excess, which our households can pay the market price. So we should make sure we avoid subsidizing fossil fuel consumption. And if companies fail, well, you need to nationalize them. The second price control is about rent, and this is to go beyond what the government has now in its budget, which is controlling only the social housing rent by only 7% increase. We need to cap also the private sector rents. And we need to think how we can control essential food prices. Part of that is also about banning speculation in the commodity market in energy, but also grains and other food items. Obviously, we need to talk about regulations such that we can stop the increase in profiteering and markups, the profit margins. We need to talk about household debt and linking that to household income, certainly banning any disconnections. We need to talk about global justice, but I know Fred is showing me the time. So, and in the very short run, we need to talk about a dual mandate for the central bank. That is, it has to target employment and not just narrowly inflation. That requires also targeting a lower rate of inflation. I'm not saying 20%, but 2%. Who says 2% is the best inflation? Well, it isn't. In the medium run, obviously, if you are controlling prices, there will be shortages. The way to deal with that is you grow your own. You grow your own renewable energy. That means you invest publicly in renewable energy. I'm using public in a broad sense, includes municipalities, cooperatives, not just central state. You need to invest in energy efficiency. That includes not just insulation, but also upgrading the grid and industrial energy efficiency. You need to invest in public transport for universal basic access to public transport. You need to also grow your own organic, sustainable, plant-based food. So the public sector should think of ways of growing the organic agriculture, forestry, circular economy, repairing, recycling, that is. That's not enough. You need to invest also what we call purple social infrastructure in the care economy. That is education, childcare, healthcare, social care, as well as other infrastructure, particularly green social housing, and obviously buildings for hospitals, schools, nurseries, and care homes. So we should avoid false dichotomies between these needs and talk about a needs-based fiscal policy. And we need to use all tools in our toolkit, including coordination of fiscal and monetary policy. And all that has to be embedded in a democratic participatory plan. I'm always asked, well, where do we find the money? Well, there is money. Public spending will partly finance itself because it creates more activity, thereby more tax revenues. Well, we need to have a network of national and regional investment banks. We need to use central bank monetary policy, meaning no more independent central bank. But last but not least, we need to have more progressive taxation of not just income, but wealth. I'm going to end with wealth taxation because the Green Party has adopted our proposal at Greenwich. Well, this is our Greenwich proposal. And I dread that Labour Party's Socialist Campaign Group MPs, with whom I do a lot of gigs, I'll do one next Saturday if you want to come, is actually not going this far, but Caroline Lucas did. So we assigned tax the top 1% wealth. That is about 260,000 households in Britain. These are households who have a net wealth, meaning wealth, assets minus debt, liabilities, that are about 3.4 million pounds. I would be surprised if anyone here in the room or in the cyber room have that much net wealth. So let's be assigned, tax them at 1%, and then increase that to a further 5% for people who have a net wealth about 5.7 million. And that's every year. That's not a one-off windfall. That's not limited to only taxing capital gains, taxing dividend income at a higher rate, or taxing the oil companies. Then we say tax at 10% rate those who have a net wealth about 18 million pounds. That's a whole lot of money. Even accounting for a certain amount of tax evasion and avoidance, we can rise with that scheme. We looked at the wealth data of the households in Britain, 70 billion pounds a year, up to 130 billion pounds a year. That's a lot of money. The band is about how much tax evasion we are sort of expecting. That's about 10 to 16% of your total tax revenues in this country. And mind you, wealth tax back in the 70s was 2% on average as a ratio to total wealth in this country. Now it's less than 1%. So it's actually, not even an unforeseen thing. I'm going to end here. A few more things to say about shorter working hours before you ask later. But well, we talk about
Thank you very much.
Discussion. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much, Özlem. Fantastic exposition.
Thank you.
And beg your pardon. Thank you very much, Özlem. Fantastic exposition. And so I like very much your program of what we can do and what is possible. So Michael, are you around?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
And you can see me, I hope. Thanks for inviting me to speak. I hope you can see me, guys. And I apologize for not being present physically at the meeting, but thanks to the rail franchise system we've had for the last 20 odd years, on Sunday, trains from Hampshire are virtually impossible to get there and back in a day, given the state that they're in at the moment. So I'm forced to continue with a Zoom contribution to you. And I apologize for that, but I hope that you'll be able to follow what I've got to say in terms of some slides. So if the organizers can allow me to share a screen, I'd appreciate that. Yes, I can do that. So let me just start with, I'm going to take a broader look at the picture. As Özlem said, in a way, Trussonomics is history. So I want to look at the history of where the UK has become basically one of the poorest countries in northwestern Europe over the last 30 or 40 years, thanks to successive government policies and other things. Let's look at UK economy and its strategy in the recent period relative to other countries. We've got a low productivity growth, low investment growth, low profitability outside energy, pharma and finance. So British capital is one of the weakest and poorest performing capitals in Europe and in the OECD. That's because we have what we call a rentier economy. Britain has chosen finance, speculation, banking institutions, and all that palaver over productive investment in industry and decent services and infrastructure. And we have, as Özlem has already said, a policy in the past and now coming forward again of austerity, trying to control the public debt, reduce budget deficits over investing productively for a better economy. In addition, the extra factor of Brexit probably means a more isolated economy, not able to trade so widely through the world, particularly in the European community, which probably loses some measure of growth. Some people say something 4 to 5% of GDP is going to be lost over the next 10 years as a result of the Brexit policy, and an intensified role by the UK as a lapdog to American hegemony, which hardly gives it the opportunity to expand. So we now, according to the House of Commons research, the poorest country in northwestern Europe based on wealth per capita of the population, behind all 13 of our closest neighbours. Why is the UK so poor? Well, first of all, the investment share in productive sectors of the economy is exceptionally low. You can see at the bottom of this graph, the light blue graph, that the UK is down the bottom there against most other countries that matter in the world economy, under 20% of GDP, while most other countries are above GDP of 20%. Even Italy is higher than the UK on that level. And there's no prospect of that changing. Here's the latest figure from the Office of Budget Responsibility on how investment will expand. The November forecast, you see the blue line there, means that business investment in the UK will not be above where it was in the mid-2010s into the second half of this decade. That's on the current forecast, and assuming no slump in the world economy over the next year, which of course, in my view, is an impossible assumption. And look at the investment in research and development by the UK. It's dropped from 2%, over 2% of GDP back in the 1980s during the Thatcher period, right down to 1.4%, and has hardly improved in the last 30 years as a result. Britain is not investing in research and development. It's not expanding its productive sector. Instead, British capital has looked to use cheap labour from immigration before Brexit and since, so that we have a lot more expansion in cheap labour operations rather than using a high technology to improve the economy. We're one of the lowest levels of installations of robots per manufacturing worker before COVID began, even lower than Slovenia and Slovakia when it comes to robots per person. This is a rentier economy, as I say. If you look at the left-hand graph here, you can see that the yellow blocks are where the UK has a higher labour productivity than Germany in different sectors. And there are only two sectors where it has a higher productivity. That is in oil production, minerals, and so on, and in finance, of course, where it has a higher productivity per worker. In every other sector that matters, particularly the productive sectors, you can see that comparing it with Germany, productivity in the UK is well below Germany in every sector, except I note arts and entertainment, creative activities. So this is a very weak, poor economy, not developing productively. The finance sector is totally unproductive. We have plenty of surveys which show that UK banks have directed all the monies that they've built up in deposits or have been pumped into them into speculative financial activity, into real estate, and not into R&D and innovation and other productive sectors in the economy. The profitability of productive investment in the UK is really low. It's now at the lowest it's been probably in 70 years. It shows no sign of rising. That means that basically all the profits that capitalists have been making in Britain have not been invested back into the productive sector and capital stock because they don't consider it profitable. They've been speculated into the finance sector and to the property sector. And one of the really startling features about the UK is the level of regional inequality between various sectors, regions in the country. That we have the highest inequality of wealth and income between regions that is possible to imagine. This is a research by the University of Sheffield, which shows across a very broad range of 28 indicators, the UK is interregionally more unequal than any other country in the OECD. Everything, wealth, conditions, employment, transport, infrastructure is all concentrated in the southeast and around London and nowhere else. In fact, British workers are increasingly employed in low-wage sectors or self-employed, as we know, particularly in regions outside London and the southeast. The real high-tech areas where there's good jobs and development are concentrated in the southeast. You can see on the right-hand side of this scale, that's the top 10 areas for digital business concentration. And looking down the list, we can find Bristol in the west, we can find Birmingham and Nottingham near the bottom there, but everywhere else is in the southeast around London. The whole of the north and the Midlands is excluded from the top 10. This is a productivity failure of major proportions. Outside of London, outside of finance, the British sector has the lowest productivity compared to its Western European peers. And labour productivity in the UK has lagged behind all the other advanced economies over a long period. So it's not just investment. The low investment has led to low productivity relative to anywhere else. And then we add, as I say, the question of Brexit, where growth has slowed down, in particular since Brexit in the UK. Real GDP per head is now dropped behind many other countries over the last period since 2016. And it's not getting any better. Here's a measure of where we're going for productivity output per hour as we go into the rest of this decade. We're way behind even the pre-crisis trend that we had before the Great Recession, and that was bad enough. And we're now on a much flatter basis. Productivity output per hour is flattening out completely in the UK. So when we come to Trussonomics, this libertarian dystopia offered by a gang of extreme right-wing libertarian economists advising Truss and her pals, you can see it has no relation to the situation that exists in the UK and can solve nothing at all. They wanted a Britain of small government, low tax, zero regulation, trickle-down economics. And as my graph on the right-hand shows you what trickle-down economics means, it doesn't trickle down, it stays with the rich through various cuts, deregulation, reductions in the ability of people to organise and so on. They wanted to build a nasty right-wing Singapore on the Thames, where the individuals living in the city of London operated in complete control of the country and everybody else suffered. They denied the climate, they wanted to reintroduce fracking, I could go on. All this, of course, not so much objectionable to the City of London and so on, but the fact that it actually damaged the existing financial position of the City of London and its prices. And then what was the reaction, as Özlem has pointed out? Immediately, the value of UK government bonds collapsed. When the yield goes up, that means the bond prices fall, and you can see the impact of what the city thought about Trussonomics. There was no way that this government could have continued with that sort of reaction from the City of London and from big business and capital, and particularly foreign capital, and how quickly they were removed in order to establish what was seen as a more stable regime for British capital. And as Özlem's pointed out, we're now moving into a period where we're having major energy poverty in the UK, where the energy bill will rocket to something like 10% or more on average of energy will be spent by 2/3 of British households on their income over the next 6 months. Something like 70% of pensioners will be into fuel poverty, and the number of households paying more than 30% of their income on fuel will double to nearly 4 million, and there'll be nearly 7.5 million people who are paying 20% of their income on fuel as we go into 2023. So end the price cap in April. That's the situation as we go into the rest of next year. We've already experienced such a reduction in post-tax labour income in the UK, spread over since the Great Recession, and also now, of course, with the huge inflation. This is the longest wage slump in 200 years, according to the TUC. Wages are not expected to return, if that's possible, to where they were until 16 years from the Great Recession, and we can't really expect that to happen. This is a disaster for the average working household in the UK, both from inflation, from austerity, from taxation, and poor growth from the British economy. The workers of Britain are being asked to pay for this. The poorest 10% in the UK pay a higher rate of tax overall in the country and double that of the richest, very, very richest of all, the effective tax rate, including indirect taxes, including the super rich. You can see the super rich pays less than the bottom 10% as an effective tax. That's all the taxes, income tax, VAT, and all the other taxes when you add them up as a percentage of income. So the record of the British economy is now that it's the only G7 economy smaller than before the pandemic. It has the highest inflation for 41 years. The average wage is lower than it was in 2007. 16 million people live in poverty. 7 million are stuck on the NHS waiting list. More than 300,000 died during the austerity period before the pandemic due to cuts in health services and so on. Life expectancy is falling and billionaires are increasing in number. The weakest recovery since the pandemic. UK economy is still 6% below the pre-pandemic rate and about 14% below where it was before the trend in terms of the Great Recession. This is the situation of the British economy as we go into 2023. And here is a measure by the Citibank, which looks at different countries and whether they're likely to go into a slump next year. If you've got a blue arrow against the country, that means you've entered the slump. If you look at the Q3, which has just ended in 2022, the left-hand side of this graph, you can see of the G7 economies, the UK is now in a slump as far as Citibank is concerned, and will continue that slump right through to the end of 2023. Euro area is now going into a slump, and the US will go into a slump sometime next year. The major economies are going into a slump, but you'll be glad to, or won't be glad to know that Britain is first into the new slump and the last out of it if it comes to an end. That's the state of this economy. What to do? As Özlem has raised a very interesting tax proposal. Here is another one, where based on the work by Aaron Advani, who looks at raising taxes on the rich through progressive taxation on income, wealth, inheritance, tax havens, tax evasion collection. You add them all together, and on the right-hand graph, you can calculate how much money will be raised if we introduce taxes on the rich in a progressive way, not on average workers and average households. And we could raise every year something like 63 billion or 2.6% of GDP every year extra to supposedly fill some fiscal hole which doesn't really exist, but more importantly, to avoid making any cuts in public services at all that the government plans towards, particularly after the next general election. 35 billion is what they're planning. This is totally unnecessary, even just by introducing progressive taxation across the board, both on incomes from stock market, from dividends of profits, and also incomes for the very rich on their wealth. Özlem's figures can raise even more if we have a wealth tax that she proposes. But my view, we have to go further than just taxation. We must end the ludicrous position where basically British capital is not investing productively. The private sector has failed us. We need to bring back into public ownership the key sectors of the economy in order to really plan for investment. Nobody ever mentions it, but we need public ownership of the big 5 banks and the financial institutions to end this speculation. We need control of the strategic industries, water, energy, telecoms, transport, pharma, social media. That's a radical plan for really bringing democratic control over our resources, collectively owned and planned. The right-hand graph gives you an indication of whether people think public ownership is a good idea or not. The latest figures on water, buses, rail, NHS, energy, the Royal Mail, 65% plus people, and that includes all the Tories voting as well, are in favour of bringing these sectors of the economy into public ownership. It's a no-brainer, but unfortunately has no wide support amongst the Labour leadership or even the trade union leadership, as far as I can see, to implement. But unless we have a national plan for investment and infrastructure, broadband, climate change, environment, housing, public services, we can never turn the British economy around. We can never avoid the disaster which impends next year, but also over the next decade for the next generation. We will remain one of the poorest countries in the world. Is that something we want? I don't think so.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. I must have heard my alarm ring a couple of minutes ago, but thank you very much. Thank you both of you for such a expansive analysis and proposals for some solutions. So anyway, the floor is open to questions, comments, etc. I see the chat is very busy. There's 4 to 6 chats already. That's the privilege of the people who are online in cyberspace, but unfortunately we can't see them. If anybody can see the chat, maybe there's some things which you might want to repeat verbally at some time. So anyway,
Frank, can I just say that I've posted my slides on the chat for people to take home and read afterwards?
We'll download it and we can send it to participants afterwards.
Right. So yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
well done.
It should turn on.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, it's working. Thank you for both of your talks. They were really informative and interesting, and particularly in terms of setting sort of a policy agenda for the future. I was interested in the sort of point about libertarianism, in relation to sort of Trussonomics, because it does seem a consistent feature of libertarian ideology that it moves ahead of what the capitalist class actually desires. And I think it's been a consistent feature of frustration for libertarian ideology that they haven't found advocacy from the capitalist class, leading to some conspiracy theories about how the capitalist class is fundamentally state controlled and corrupt and so on and so forth, because they're not backing their sort of free market policy. So it's interesting when the state does come in and do that, the markets respond as they have. To go a bit beyond the present, which is always a dangerous thing to do in terms of sort of speculation, it does look increasingly likely that we're heading into a Keir Starmer government, and the limitations of that project are really apparent. I would be really interested in what both speakers can say about what the likely consequences of a Keir Starmer policy agenda in terms of the economy, and how that will interact with the kind of economic situation that he's going to inherit from Truss and Sunak. Thank you.
Thank you. And just when people, I call them people, if they can introduce themselves just by their first name and the city they come from. So, yeah, come with the white hair. I don't know.
Quite a lot.
Yeah, quite a lot of us.
Thank you. My name is Turcay. I'm from London. My question is to Michael. It's about, in his slides, there was a moment in which said, the successive British governments, their choices led to finance-centered and, tech-centered and low-productive economy in other areas. But what my question is, do really British government has a choice in the division of labor in the global scale, when capitalist market forces are in action to determine who is doing what? And, you say something like Britain is the lapdog of, America, which kind of like gives a lot of place to the nation states. And I'm wondering if you would reflect how this adds up with the general concept of capitalism and capitalist market force in the global scale. Thank you.
Pete from Brent.
Pete from Kilburn. The questions as much as anything else. Thanks to both for the introductions. First off, Starmer has said he accepts the figure that the government put on deficit. Now, am I right in thinking that there's nothing wrong in itself with that? It's then a question of what to do about that rather than any problem with that. But just clarify that. It'd be interesting if you could expand on the parallels with the politics of Ayn Rand and that libertarianism, and maybe touching on the lobbyists behind Truss. The Lions not led by donkeys did quite a good thing on the Tufton Street lobbyists, the various lobbyists encouraging her and so on, which has since disappeared with her. But that would be quite. And my other point is this: Michael talked a lot about low productivity. Now, I always think that saying we need increased productivity basically means you want to extract more surplus value from workers, and I'm not sure that that's something that socialists are in favour of. So, there is a question. Yes, in terms of the health of British capitalism, greater productivity is a good thing, but I'm not sure it's a brilliant thing for the working class.
Simon at the back there.
Fred,
Alone as well, because
Sorry.
there's people on camera.
All right, well, I can't see at the back, so somebody needs to tell me that there's hands going up, right?
Because you should take the average.
Yeah, of course.
Bob, Susan and Steph, you've got the hand.
Bob, Susan, and Steph. All right, after Simon, I'll take Susan, and then Bob, and then Steph.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Simon from the village of Chetnall in North Dorset, but currently living in Tooting. I just like to represent people from villages rather than just cities, as Fred said. I think it's worth thinking how Trussonomics ended, which is, spectacular crash and burn brought down by the financial markets. And although I thought it was delicious to watch and I loved every second of it, it is a stark warning, I think, for the left as well. I mean, obviously the left wouldn't be brought down for the same policies that Truss and Kwesi Kwarteng were putting forward, but in the end, that government was defeated by action by hedge funds, international bankers, and so on, who reacted. And let's be clear. Yes, it was about the tax cuts on the very wealthy, but it was only because there was also a massive expenditure on energy bills. If Truss had just proposed the tax cuts, the financial markets would have been, I imagine, totally fine with that. It would have been great. But it was the uncosted spending, as it were, or like the danger of having a massive public sector spending and then also having tax cuts at the same time, which spooked the markets and felt that the Truss government couldn't deliver economic stability, which of course is the exact same thing they would use against the left. They would accuse the left of not being able to deliver economic stability, spending too much, being reckless with finances and so on. So I think we have to think about that. I also wanted to add, I liked some of the proposals that Özlem and Michael put forward. I would like to hear more though, because they were still very much for me kind of policies for a left government. What should workers be fighting for as workers right now? I liked the thing around price controls. I think that's a key thing. The fact that we don't have price controls in the rental market, for instance. I mean, London is one of the biggest cities in the world without any rent caps, which is, contributing to the housing market crisis. So I like the thing on price controls, but what else can workers be fighting for in the current situation? I'll just wrap up on this. I think obviously the capitalist class always use a crisis as an excuse to further their own agenda. But of course, our side can use the crisis as a way of trying to push forward what we want. And one of the most interesting campaigns I've come across recently is the Right to Food campaign, who are saying, let's just decommodify key foods, breads, potatoes, and things like that. I think that's excellent. I think that's a really good idea, because this is also what socialism is about. It's not just taxing the rich and things like that. I mean, all that happens within capitalism. One of the key things of socialism is we begin to remove things from the commodification of the market. We begin to say, actually, these things are not going to be commodities anymore. They will just be provided to people as needed. And I think that's one of the things we could be arguing for instance.
Thanks. I've got 4 speakers online, so maybe I could take the Michael and Özlem now briefly, and then come back to the speakers online. Yeah. Okay. Take a few minutes. Take up some of these.
Do I have to do anything to the mic before? Brilliant. Yeah, it is likely that we may end up with a Labour government. Is that being recorded? Discussion.
Lauren?
It is being recorded.
Yes.
Okay. So Summer Reeves and said they have been driving the wrong lessons from the failure of Truss and Kwarteng government. And they are positioning themselves as the government of fiscal credibility. And this curse was already haunting even Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and John McDonnell's shadow chancellery. So let's see the positive that what may come with Starmer Reeves, a Labour government. I suppose Trade Union Act will improve. They will reverse the kind of things that the former government has done, conservative government, the new conservative government is almost trying to do. So more power to workers. I do also want to acknowledge that they have a clear idea of fiscal credibility where they say we will borrow to invest. And that investment is defined in conventional terms as physical infrastructure and with a focus on some green investments in renewable energy in particular. Also using potentially a national investment bank. Now, when we were, this doesn't look like any more regressive than what John McDonnell was saying, as much as, I worked with John McDonnell, I respect him a lot, but to him, we had also said, this is a very narrow understanding of fiscal credibility. And at the time, we had proposed redefine investment. And I don't know if it came across in my speech clearly. I'm not saying let's spend just by borrowing. I'm saying borrowing is one of the kits in our policies, in our toolkit that we should use, we can use. So is progressive taxation of wealth or income or a national investment bank, and also the Pandora box saying use monetary policy, meaning outright purchase of government bonds by the central bank, Bank of England, directly from the government to use it for investment. So borrowing should be okay, and it shouldn't be limited to physical infrastructure. Women's Budget Group in this country is known for saying that. Redefine investment, go beyond conventional definition, include in it what feminists call social infrastructure, purple infrastructure, as I put a color on it, borrowing from a Turkish feminist economist, that is spending, the current spending in healthcare, social care, education, and childcare. It is infrastructure because it provides the basis, material basis of our society to function, to reproduce itself in the feminist sense. And it does contribute to productivity. And I'm going to touch on that in a minute, part that question and the correct concerns that you have around it. But we want to improve our social fabric, and that is investment. By the way, when we say spending in social care or childcare, this is the wages of the nursery teacher, social care worker. That's current spending in your conventional statistics. Well, we need to hire more nurses, more social care workers, more nursery teachers, and pay them much higher wages than it is currently done. And these are, public sector employees. It's all in the hands of the government. By the way, it's also not going to cause any inflation. This can be funded by public spending. Okay, so that should be defined as investment too. And obviously, as much as I want to tax the wealth of the top 1%, these things take time to institutionalize. So you need to borrow, and the scale of investment that you have to do in public transport, in social housing, in renewable energy, energy efficiency, social infrastructure is so big that you have to start today. So I see a chance to squeeze Starmer and Reeves to the corner to discuss this when they say childcare. It is a government for me that I can make demands to. In some aspects, it is not more to the right of the former John McDonnell's office. So there are opportunities there, though, and when I talk to the Socialist Campaign Group MPs, they're very modest in taxing the rich. They put what Michael was putting up, taxing the wealth of those about 10 billion by just 1%. I want to tax that cohort by 10%. We are starting to tax by 1% those about £3.5 billion of tax. But I mean, these are not written into stone, and when those people are in place, it is easier to make demands to them than making demands to Rishi Sunak, obviously, for me. Okay, productivity. I don't want exploitation, but I want to be able to produce what I have to produce in a shorter time, such that in the rest, I can do politics, I can dance, I can do nothing. Meaning productivity is something that we would want to have as long as workers have a control in the distribution of the output we produce, and as long as we can use it to shorten working hours. We should be able to shorten the working hours by the increase of historical productivity. As of today, we are almost working part-time compared to 19th century, right? Working hours have declined dramatically and then stopped in the 80s. Now today, if you want to decrease working hours gradually to 30, 25 hours a week, we need to be able to produce things maybe more with machines and more with productivity. But sorry, I have to say now one more thing. Simon, I was very quick because Fred was nagging me. Now I'm gonna say please wait, because of course I started by saying short run. We can't address today's crisis by saying, oh, when we're in government, we're going to invest in insulation and renewable energy, it will be all cheaper and provide public transport. No, what can you do? Well, first of all, it's very important. Ideologically, just let's break that dogma that wages can't increase, it will lead to inflation. Well, wages can increase if we manage to squeeze the profit margins of the firms. Something you haven't said. So one way to today control prices is to make sure that not just in energy sector, but those food industry giants, their profit margins are squeezed, then you can increase wages without any inflation effect. But join a union, obviously short term, minimum wage, £15 an hour was our June demand. With the inflation going further, we need to look at that as well. Minimum wage should be increased. Pay rise for all the public sector workers, obviously, recovering past losses. These are things I said, but price controls, I said three things, isn't it? Energy prices, not in the sense of encouraging more fossil fuel energy use, but we need to cap energy prices up to a certain amount of energy use. We need to control the rents, I said, not just social rents in the private sector too, while we manage to build more of our own social housing. And third, we need to think what can be done with essential food prices. Part of that will be about banning speculation in the commodity market, but part of that is to be about subsidizing essential food items until we can grow our own, meaning expand organic, sustainable agriculture. I did say ban disconnections, Simon, and I did not say, but it is important, ban evictions, obviously, in the short run. And I didn't have time to say it before, now I'll say, we need to talk about the global justice and debt restructuring as well. This is also here and now and short run. We feel that in this country, people are suffering, but people are dying of famine in the other parts of the world. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
I believe you.
That's fine. Michael.
Yes, well, productivity raised. I think Özlem has answered that well. We want to reduce the time it takes to produce things and services that we need. Our social needs should be, the time we take to toil to produce them should be reduced as best we can by using all the technology and means of organization, collective cooperation. That's what we mean by increasing productivity per worker or per hour, and that's the aim. But as you said, as the questioner said, yes, but then who decides who gets the gains of that productivity? And that's a matter of class struggle, it seems to me, between the workers who carry this out and the owners of the means of production who try to usurp and appropriate a share of the increased value that is created by workers into surplus value. So surplus value may increase out of increased productivity, but only because capitalists are able to expropriate it from working class. So it's a class struggle. And that brings you to the question of the struggle between wages and profits. As one questioner said, what do we do? What do workers do now? Well, the basic thing, it seems to me, is that we must be struggling for wage demands which match at least the increase in inflation, so that workers' living standards are not reduced by this inflationary surge and by the increase in borrowing costs and mortgage rates, which now the Bank of England is piling on top of us. So wage demands have got to match the increase in inflation, and workers are trying. I mean, every day we're now hearing about sectors of the working class movement in this country organising through the unions to take industrial action to try and recoup the losses in the 200-year loss in real wage incomes that the workers are experiencing at the moment. So that seems to be the basic task. Özlem raised the question of price controls. Yeah, price controls, the best way, in my view, to control prices and to get the inflation down is not just to introduce controls from the government, but why don't we take control of the people who are increasing the prices, the big energy companies, the water companies, the rail companies, all the other sectors of the economy which the companies are putting up prices. If we had public ownership of those companies and we had public ownership of the banks, which again is hardly mentioned ever in the labour movement, public ownership of the big banks and the central bank brought under control so that finance is used not to speculate in property and in hedge funds and in bonds and the pension funds, but is used to invest productively, then we can begin to increase productivity and reduce the impact of inflation upon the economy, and workers and the organizations, the companies that were brought into public ownership collectively can be used to control prices. That seems to me the way forward. I think that, of course, is a very left-wing and radical proposal, which will produce apoplexy in the City of London, far worse than Trussonomics did. And so we would face a major confrontation with the City of London, big business, and the world companies as well. As one questioner said, the world economy cannot be excluded from that. How do we fight that? Well, you have to have a radical approach. It seems to me if money is going to be withdrawn from Britain, then we need to put immediately capital controls on everything so that they cannot take this money out. And the bank workers and bank institutions under our control will ensure that it doesn't disappear. And just because it's not in the interest and the profits of big business in the City of London. Of course, that raises a whole radical transformation of the economy and probably a major political battle, which I'm afraid at the moment we cannot expect the next Labour leadership, if they're in government, to be prepared to carry out. On the contrary, instead, we can see that a battle will commence now at the level of industry for workers to try and sustain their incomes and adopt, and we would hope at least some of the proposals that I've raised in the question of taxation. In the meantime, you can all look forward to Liz Truss announcing her honours list, which she hasn't done yet, and all those Ayn Rand lunatics who were advising her before from the Institute of Economic Affairs will all become barons in the House of Lords. At least Keir Starmer's planning to abolish the House of Lords.
Maybe. Right, thank you. Well, I'll just read out the list I have. I've got five people online: Susan, Bob, Steph, Alan, Steve Griffiths, and Terry. And I think I should, and with Özlem and Michael coming back on those questions, I think I'll take us up to 3 o'clock. So, well, I know, but I've got 6 here, but very briefly. I'll see how we are doing for time after Terry's spoken, yeah? Okay, so Susan, next. So everybody who's coming in with questions, comments can try and... Camera. Yeah?
All right. Can I go? Okay, I mean, I remember many years ago, they interviewed David Cameron, who ridiculously argued that the government cannot create economic growth. And I said, has this man been living on another planet? And has he never heard of the post-war boom or the New Deal or things along those lines? It's a level where denying what has happened and creating and revising a new history. And a similar type of weird thing happened recently, which was with they had an interview with the TBI, the leader who said, well, in order for there to be growth, we need labor and productivity. And I said, Well, really, and whose fault is this? Because the main problem has been raised over and over again is the issue of productivity. And the reason, because as Michael said, they chose instead to destroy the social subsistence level of income by undermining not only wages, they stagnated wages, but what they did is they undermined benefit income. And by undermining benefit income, they used that to bring down further income. And then, of course, there was the freeze in public sector income first, and then the capping of 1%. What you have here is in terms of you want to look at capitalist reasons for technological innovation, they were gone instead with lowering wages. And what happens in the absence of productivity is what we have: a weak trade union base, and basically you wind up in a wage profit squeeze. And what's happening is we are in a squeeze, and what's happening with the inflation is making it worse. So we're in a situation of long-term stagnation. But do you think that's really important? It's like all these people who love using the name Adam Smith seem to have not read his discussion on the division of labor or his discussion on wages. And in the division of labor, this is where the increase in workers' precarity is relevant, because people are not staying in jobs long. They're shifting from place to place. They're undermining their conditions of work, and they never develop those skills and adaptations that they learn how to do the work in a way that is better and more productive, because this is the way that they chose on a choice of technique. So that basic mechanism, which would increase productivity, is gone. And that's done because of their things. I find it ridiculous in this day and age that we have to go back to Adam Smith when it's really clear how we can do this. I just wanted to respond to one of the points that Mike raised in there. We're not looking at an issue of necessarily speed up. What we want to do, as people have said, is if we allow for growth in the things that we need in our society: care, healthcare, education, building housing, things that people need, water, things like that, then we can ensure instead a shorter work week. But as it is now, there's absolutely no. I remember there was a struggle in the 19th century for a 10-hour working day. I thought they had won that. It seems to have disappeared. So we're in this very bizarre situation where we're trapped in a wage squeeze. I'm sorry, I don't have much time to talk about this, but one of the main points is the labor shortage, and why it's not unemployment, but it's a labor shortage. And what's happened? Why do we have that? And that's Brexit.
Right, okay. Sorry to people online, but it's a bit difficult to wave at you when you're. This is my timer for the people. Technology. So sorry apologies to Susan online, but it's a bit difficult sharing to wave at you to show that you need to wind up. So I would have been interrupting you to say, can you wind up? Anyway, so try and keep the 3 minutes. Bob next. Bob?
Okay, I might say three things. First of all, I know comrades are learning how to run mixed events, but this event would be a disaster if you have to lip read or what Roland is doing this afternoon is moving a camera all over the place. It makes me feel sick, to be honest. So we've got to take more care on assessment. But I might have raised two other points. One, I can only raise briefly, and that is I disagree with what Özlem said about sexual care. I disagree with a lot of feminist views on this, because in my opinion, they collude with the ruling class of the ideology about older and disabled people. they couldn't with policies that go back to the poor rule. And in fact, McDonald's policies for social care were crap. They were oppressive and they won't work and they won't actually meet the needs that people have. Why? Because it starts from the basis that you have certain groups of people who can be taken out of the community and stuck away in privately run residential homes because they have no economic or social value to capitalist society. So I'm questioning, is that also going to be a position under socialist societies that will round us up and stick us in the home? Starting to question that, comrades. We need a holistic approach, and we have to break with the capitalist idea that you can fudge together the NHS and the neoliberal social construct of social care. I never hear you lot actually define what you mean by social care. Because for me, you can stuff it where the sun don't shine. So don't want it, we don't want it. And that leads on to my last point. We have to be very careful, Michael, when we talk about vulnerable groups. What is the basis of their vulnerability? Is it their characteristics, or is it the social situations that society places them in? And the capitalists are very good at defining people as vulnerable in order to control them, to make them invisible and silence them. What we should be doing is actually exposing the real nature of their vulnerability, which is about policies and practice.
Thank you very much, Bob. And sorry about the technology. We're still on a learning curve here, and it's also distracting here the way the camera whizzes, but we're learning and hopefully we're getting better at it. Next person is Steph. Steph from London, is it?
Thanks. I've always had trouble following and understanding economics, but also within the framework that we use all the same terminologies as people on the right wing. When do we mean something different by it? I mean, in particular, GDP. I mean, do we have to accept, what definition do we have of GDP? Because it seems to be an equal sign with growth. And again, what do we think about growth? Because I'm looking at this from a climate change and climate emergency point of view. Similarly on productivity, although people have raised the issue of productivity already now, I mean, how do we counter the myth that it's always the workers and the lazy workers that aren't productive enough? But what do we mean by being productive enough, I think, is the question people have asked. So I was quite interested in Michael's term. I think he used the productivity of capital. Are you saying that capital productivity just goes into investment outside of the economy that they're taking it from, or just into their pockets? I didn't really get that. Because you were also saying your logic was that bankers were some of the most productive workers in the country, or in your statistics. So it just seems to make a mockery of the whole terminology to me. So why do we have to use that terminology? But I do like some of the practical solutions and proposals that are being put forward. But my real question is, how do we look at economics and all these issues in the terms of climate emergency and climate growth, where not climate growth, sorry, where we're saying, you know, we've got to reduce, we've got to reuse, we've got to repair, we've got to protect the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steph. Alan?
Yes, yeah. I want to respond to the question that was raised earlier about what do we do about Keir Starmer. I'm in the Oxford Labour Party. Before that, I was in the Labour Party in Southwark. I've been involved for about 5 years in various initiatives inside the Labour Party to sharpen up its ecological profile and strengthen its demands and so on. Both in SERA, which is its official thing, Red Green Labour, which some of us were involved, and also the campaign for a Green New Deal, which ran a big campaign prior to the last election. And it's been hard going, and it's still hard going, no doubt about that. But something rather amazing happened at the last Labour Party conference. The Starmer put forward a Green New Deal, which in terms of what it pledges in terms of carbon reduction is more radical than anything the left has put in all that time in terms of Labour Party. It's true it dodged nationalisation, and that's what we should campaign for in the future, but it's a serious proposal. He's proposing 28 billion a year on the development of green energy. He's proposing, and this is the radical one, to decarbonise the national grid entirely by 2030. It's a big one. He's proposing to treble solar energy, treble offshore wind, double onshore wind, to retrofit 19 million houses, and which he doesn't put a timeline up. But I mean, it's a serious package. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it doesn't say nationalisation, and that we obviously will campaign on that. It includes nuclear, which we're opposed to, and it includes carbon capture and storage, which doesn't exist. But nevertheless, it's a serious package. Now, I've been trying to raise now for some months in Momentum in Oxford how the left should respond to this. Now, mostly I've got well, he's a right-wing shitbag and he won't do it. Well, that's not really an answer, in my opinion. You know, in my opinion, well, he is a right-wing shitbag, but in my opinion, our attitude to him should be what he has pledged himself to. We demand he introduces, and we demand it's in the election manifesto, because actually it's a victory for the left that he did that. I don't know exactly how it came about, but I mean, there's big campaigning in the Labour Party on this. You know, the annual conferences, there's been the World Transformed conferences, which have had a very big profile on all these issues. So it's a victory for us, and our starting point should be he must implement it, and you know, and it's he's saying it. Usually we're saying he should implement something else that we've got there against his will. He's done this himself. So if we can't see our own victories, grasp our own victories, defend our own victories, then it's a bit of a problem, really. We can't just say, oh, well, we campaigned five years for that. He's made a pretty good proposal, but now we've got no interest or whatever in what he does with it. So, and also I would say finally as well, there's a big strategic issue here. The Tories, what's coming out since the Ukraine war and everything, the Tories have gone all the way to the right, back to fossil fuels, expanding production in the North Sea and everything else. Starmer has said, I'm going in the other direction, and he said this at conference, whether we're talking about the economic crisis or the ecological crisis, there is only one answer, and it's renewable energy. And that's a fundamental, he said, I know it's rhetoric, but he said, I want to make Britain a green energy superpower.
Right, okay. Next speaker is Steve Griffin.
Am I not being allowed to finish?
Well, you have more than 4 minutes.
I seem to be the first person that's been cut off.
No, you haven't, Alan. You haven't. Others have.
You can have some of my time, Alan.
Steve.
Is Alan finished then?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to touch on a few words that I've scribbled down. We talk about productivity. When we talk about productivity, we're talking about people, young, old, with skills of all sorts of types. You know, of the old manual skills, craft skills, mechatronic skills, which I've tampered with and been part of, machine tools, all this sort of stuff was my bread and butter for a long period of time. And so when we want, if we want to transition from we have to have people, educational places like the older FE colleges do, where young people and old people get to start to implement the sort of ideas and the plans that we discussed this afternoon. Unfortunately for us, we, as Ian Allison pointed out yesterday, with the shrinking of trade unionism, it means some of the features that were around when I was in the AUEW have disappeared. And what I mean by that is the trade unions, top, middle, and bottom, had an interest in getting people in who were well educated, who could do their jobs, and could, make profits for the boss. But if we want the capability of renewing what we can do, installations in the home, in the technical world, we have to really think out what sort of demands we place on the Labour Party, on the education unions, and in our trade unions. Regrettably, we don't have an old-fashioned engineering union. The right basically dissolved it. But if we're serious about these things, we have to bring on side the potential that it is around, especially amongst young people who are upskilling themselves. I'm just going to show you this book, right? Most people will recognise it. It's Harry Braverman's book, and it goes back to the 40s, and it showed the implications of the increasing the organic composition of capital and the de-skilling. We have to challenge that. It's not as though we haven't got access to the literature and the ideas which we can build on. And just to finish, I mean, Birmingham is still, it still has some of these capabilities. They're building an high-speed bloody railway between here and London, basically, so the middle classes can have a property in Solihull and work in the city. That's my cynical view of the situation. But these sort of projects have to be made our own. That's all, and thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve. Well, I'm going to take two more people. We're supposed to finish at 3. The next session starts at 3:30, but we'll run over by a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes or so, right? It'll give us 20 minutes break. So I've still got Terry, Jamie online, and is that it? No other hands, right? Okay, last call, that's it. So Terry for 3 minutes and Jamie online for 3 minutes.
Sorry, that was a really bad time to cough. So two things.
It's unplug your and plug it back in when you need to speak.
Right.
Yeah, that's much better. First on productivity. The other thing that seems to me is that workers are always coming up with ideas about how to improve productivity, and they usually mean get that boss off my back. Very often bureaucratic and punitive managerial processes massively reduce productivity. So it seems to me workers' control actually raises those questions. Secondly, on Simon's question, you see, I think it's the wrong question. I think Özlem didn't understand the question, but I would pose it in a different way. We can talk about what we want government to do, but how do we, by which I mean not just workers, but workers and users, and I think it's a mistake to separate them,
what can we do to increase our purchase today on preventing evictions, on imposing price control? You know, what's the strategy of the Don't Pay campaign? So I think it's in that sense that we both need to have a program that we try and impose on the people at the top, but we also look at how can we increase the political space we're occupying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, Jamie online. Jamie online.
Yes.
3 minutes,
Hello.
Jamie.
Oh.
I'll cut you off after 3 minutes and a bit. Right, but you won't be the first one or the last one to be cut off, so don't worry. It's nothing personal.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, okay. Both Özlem and Michael gave, I think, fantastically good sort of programmatic ideas about, firstly, about fiscal policy, tax and spend, and secondly, about, in the sense, industrial policy, particularly Michael, talking about the need for the nationalizations, for a program of productive investment, and so on. The question I have really is sort of agency, really. I mean, how, through what means in Britain right now can we contribute to campaigning on these vital issues, vital for the entire working class, the entire population? How can we, and the issues, the program which has been put forward is by Michael and Özlem are very radical, but they're also actually incredibly popular. So how can we do this? Well, we've got a situation where the main means by which this would normally be done would be by the Labour Party, the party of the working class, bourgeois party of the working class, which is the only one that can really project these things. However, we know Starmer absolutely refuses to have anything to do with anything like these ideas. He refuses to tax business and the rich anymore. He refuses to nationalize even the bloody water industry. He won't even nationalize that. So, what we need is some means for the labor movement, to use an old-fashioned word, the labor movement as a whole, to campaign on these issues beyond individual strikes, which of course are essential at the moment, but for these fiscal and industrial policies, to campaign for them. Now, we have the People's Assembly, we have Enough is Enough, we have perhaps the Green, amongst politicians, the Green Party, the Socialist Campaign Group, I don't know. So I'd really like to just ask a sort of question to us collectively. How can we develop a labor movement campaign around these, if you like, macroeconomic issues? It's very difficult, but I think totally essential.
Thanks, Jamie, for the big question. Right, I'll take Michael and then Özlem in that order. Yeah, so I'll give you 5 minutes each, right? So we're going to have a 20-minute break before the next session, which starts at 3:30, right? Well, even 4 minutes each. 4 minutes each, all right? I'll avoid the speakers this time. All right, okay, go ahead, Michael.
Well, guys, I hope I won't take 5 minutes because I just want to concentrate. I think one of the first questions about producing more when we have a climate change and global warming disaster impending already with us. It's past midnight, as we saw with COP27. nothing is being done about the rise in emissions or even reducing them to the level necessary in order to keep the world from going above 1.5 degrees centigrade from pre-industrial levels and even higher as we go through the rest of this decade. The world is hotting up. We're going to have more floods, droughts, famines, emigration. This is a major issue. And Alan's touched on the question of a Green New Deal in the UK, but we have to look at the wider prospects, and what we need is global action and global coordination on this question. We cannot be left just to a general discussion about emissions and so on. Yes, and GDP no way reflects this factor. GDP is a measure for use by British capital, by capital in general, in order to understand how their economies are doing. It's a measure of the health of the capitalist economy. It's not the measure of the welfare of working people around the world. It's not a measure of the huge inequalities which exist in the world in wealth and income. And above all, it's not a measure of the disaster and the environment and the planet that's hitting it. So the GDP I use all the time because it tells me what the capitalist economy is doing, but it doesn't tell me how working people are doing and how the planet's doing. So in that sense, it's a complete contradiction. It could, in fact, reflects the contradiction between capitalism and our social needs and the struggle for socialism. And in that sense, the questioner has raised a very important contradiction we must understand about the progress ahead for us.
Well, thank you very much, Michael.
Okay, I'll start with thanking Bob for bringing that up. I think this is why we need to talk about a needs-based and democratic and participatory plan, because what are the needs in the care economy is a decision for, well, the people who use the services, use the care, and the people who are getting the care. For me, it is something we need to invest in, and it's my job to calculate how we fund it. Yeah, but I think it is an important contribution. Now, there was something that is from the previous round that I left out. So what, as a leftist government, we are to take out of what happened in September to a conservative government. And I said it in a meeting with John McDonnell and Richard Bergen and other MPs at the end of the autumn budget of Jeremy Hunt, in this case, in November. Well, our left government won't be a walk in the park. If a left government rises even in the opinion polls, capital starts flowing out. There's some things we can do with capital controls. And it would be nice if there were a moderate government before a more radical government who had done these, such that the amount of capital that can flow out before a radical government comes in power will be more moderated. But of course, a lot of capital will flow out. It's not gonna be easy, but there is still some capital that can't flow out. And I was myself very humbled by what happened to Truss and Kwarteng, in the sense that even when we say we need to learn the lesson, there's only so much you can borrow, you need to be able to fund some of your spending, at least in the medium run. Well, what is my funding? Taxing wealth. Surely that's not going to be very calming for the financial markets when we say we're going to tax all the wealth from financial assets to land to business assets of the top 1%. They're going to try to relocate whatever they can. So, yeah, obviously we have to be quite sober about that. Now, GDP. We are not using the term gross domestic product as a measure of the health of our economy. I'm mostly interested in A, sectoral composition of that, B, the distribution of that. But Steph, really, please. I mean, at the macro level, gross domestic product is nothing but national income. So there's nothing ideological about the aggregate national income of an economy itself. if you think growing that in itself is a name, that becomes an ideology. If you don't look at the distribution of that, well, that is ideology. And now coming to the implied discussions around degrowth here. Again, there's something we need to be sober. We are talking about the need for a massive scale of investments in renewable energy, energy efficiency, public transport, social housing, health, childcare, education, and care services. So that's a lot of new activity that will grow. Susan said that. Some things will grow and will grow at a much faster rate than it has been doing in the past. We want to degrow other things, surely military sector, surely we want to shut down fossil fuels, but will that be enough for an economy to degrow even if your most radical socialist government is in power? I doubt it. Obviously, we want to change behavior of consumption as well. I today noticed this jacket is 30 years old. Yes, consumerism, that has to be totally, culturally reshaped. But consumption of meat, that's why I emphasize growing your own, grow organic, plant-based, sustainable agriculture such that people get space to change their nutrition norms. Even when you do all of these, even some things around the consumption of textiles and meat production degrow radically, you have to be sober. If you invest in the things you want, aggregate output, which equals the aggregate income, may increase in the first 5 years of transition to a zero carbon economy. And productivity, please just again, this is output produced per hour of work if we are talking about labor productivity. Yes, there is also output per unit of machine capital that you can measure. And I am in favor of increasing productivity, but also I'm in favor of decreasing productivity when I think of health or education services. So there are discussions around it. Let's not be too quick in when we hear the word productivity getting itchy or we hear the word GDP. Let's look a bit deeper than that.
Thank you very much. Very much for Michael and Özlem.